welcome to our In Conversation With series. We're really grateful to have you join us. And Georgia, so you're the CEO of Tumelo. For those who haven't heard of Tumelo, perhaps you could give us some information about its purpose and mainly how you came to set it up. That would be great.
Yeah, so I guess the mission of Tumelo is to help all investors access their shareholder rights. It's to empower people to understand what they're invested in and to have a voice on the issues that they care about. And in terms of how it actually works, we have basically built some software that connects to investment platforms and pension platforms so that the investors on those platforms can not only make the investments, but also see what companies are inside the funds they're invested in, and also have awareness of upcoming shareholder votes that are happening at those companies inside their funds to be able to have a voice. So for example, if you're invested in Amazon through a fund, and there is a gender equality question coming up at Amazon shareholder resolution, then you as a pension member or a retail investor would be able to have a say. We send that information through to your fund manager, who can then actually have influence at Amazon's board meeting or their shareholder meeting. So it's all about kind of connecting the investment chain, helping people who currently don't have a voice to have more influence and more transparency, building accountability between different stakeholders, and ideally, at the end of the day, creating a more sustainable investment system. So as well as, I guess, education and financial literacy and helping people just improve their financial knowledge and well-being as individuals.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And you articulate that so well, because there's so many questions that are flying around my head at the same time as you're talking. So obviously the investor confidence in what they're investing in and having that ability to vote and even play their part in those issues that are going on in the underlying funds that they're invested in, but also without launching, and I didn't really want to do this, but launching straight into the tech side of things, connecting the tech is often the biggest part, because education's great, information is great, and the end customer being informed and empowered is great. But how have you found so far that the willingness from the traditional financial services tech providers or platforms to actually understand what you're doing and what the end goal is, and then their appetite to make the first move or the second move into joining the dots?
Yeah, I think that on the whole, everyone's really interested to understand what we're doing. So that A piece is covered. I think people are very intrigued. It's quite new, and it's definitely going in the direction of kind of the zeitgeist of the public, but also the same way that reporting and kind of government policies are going. So it's not working against the grain. It's really flowing with other changes in the industry. In terms of people launching, I mean, we've had a really big year. We only launched the product in June last year, so we've been live for about a year. And we're already working with some of the largest pension providers in the UK, and we started launching with retail platforms as well this year. So I think uptake has been really strong, given that we're doing something not like controversial, but a bit different. We're giving power to the little person at the end of the line that hasn't had it. We're helping them see a lot more. Like, you might have expected to see more resistance than we did. I think certainly for our kind of founding customers like Elgin, for example, they definitely see like the vision that we have, and their whole mantra is inclusive capitalism. They want people to be involved and to participate in kind of the new economy that they are so influential in building. So, I think we're very well aligned with most of our customers in terms of mission and vision and what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully we enable them to get there faster than they might on their own, and with a slightly different or more creative approach.
So, George, I was going to ask about, you've got Elgin, but what about regulators and those sorts of bodies? How are they finding what is, the purpose of Tumelo and how that's all happening and working for the customer? Have you had much engagement from the regulators?
Well, we have spoken to the FCA and the pensions regulator separately. I mean, to the individuals I spoke to, they were really obviously fans of what we were doing. And certainly they've got clear communication guidelines, which we lean on quite heavily because we're trying to simplify everything that we communicate, while some of the partners we work with are always overcomplicating everything or complicating it to the point that they think they need to. But actually the FCA, for a start, has got some very clear communication guidelines. So we do lean on them quite heavily for knowing, how to write what we write on the platform, but we're not working so much in a regulated capacity as Tumelo. Obviously our customers are regulated, but our activity is not. And the vote itself that people place on the platform, it's advisory only. So we call it a vote preference. Or we say, have your voice or share your opinion. So people don't think that they're voting at Amazon's annual general meeting, and they don't have the power to vote at Amazon's general meeting. That power and control tends to sit with the fund manager. So we're quite clear that it's going to the fund manager, and the fund manager is not obliged to do what you say. They have committed as a partner of Tumelo to take your opinion into account, but that is the extent of it. But they do then also commit to show you what they did. So if they didn't vote with you, then they communicate to you why they voted against the majority of members or against management of the company or whatever they decided to do. So yeah, I guess in short, we haven't had huge reason to speak to the regulators, but they know about us. And Sasha, who has left from Elgin to be head of stewardship at the FCA, so I'm hoping that we will be able to pick up more of a conversation with them in due course. And I think certainly as the DWP, who we have had much more kind of relations with, I guess, is doing a lot of work on policy around stewardship and pensions. How can we make sure that trustees hold their fund managers accountable and have slightly better monitoring and better communication to members? If that moves into being hardline policy that people really have to do and commit to, then obviously the FCA become more involved, or the pensions regulator.
I think what stood out for me recently was Prince Charles. I don't know if you must have seen Prince Charles. No.
What did he do? Through Cecil?
Well, Prince Charles last week, he put out it was some release calling on pension providers of pension funds to do more for their investors in terms of where they're actually putting their money to make sure that they're more responsible. So obviously he's quite green-fingered and cares a lot about the environment. And I couldn't help think about you when that news came out and thought, oh, you would probably love that story.
I haven't actually seen it. So
I'll forward it on to you, because I thought, oh, that's really bringing it forward to the consumer, the end person, to my family, my folks who aren't involved in the industry. I'm starting to get an understanding of what is beneath that investment line, because we're generally focused on that line when we're investing. Is it going up? Is it going in the right direction? But not really looking at what's underneath that, and how is that growth being generated. And so perhaps maybe you could talk to us about where you have come from in terms of why this is so important to you individually.
Yeah, well, I guess just quickly on the Prince Charles thing, obviously, yeah, he's a big advocate for sustainability generally, but I think not only will that bring it into the consumer's home, but I haven't read the article obviously, but those comments should also be more of a carrot for trustees. I think sometimes trustees feel like they're just constantly being prodded by the regulator, do this, report on that, like change this, and it's actually, they're just really swimming to keep up with all the things that they need to do, and it's less proactive. Whereas, having someone like Prince Charles say this is really important and something you should aim towards rather than be kind of chasing you, maybe also could start to change the mindset of trustees who are managing those funds. So in terms of myself, I studied natural sciences at uni. Climate change and sustainability was a big part of that. Really, I was looking at ecology, if you know what that is, a kind of human interaction with the environment. So sustainability is really interesting. Biodiversity is something I'm very passionate about, or biodiversity loss is something I'm very concerned about, to put it more specifically. And it felt to me like, when thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were decided on whilst I was at university, at least the 2030 goals. So we did a lot of work around that, and there was a huge financial deficit to be able to meet those goals. It was like, hey, these are really great ideals to have, but who's going to pay for us to get there? And obviously then you look at the pension space, or really the institutional investment market, where you've got huge mutual fund managers who just have so much wealth under their control. It's not really theirs because it belongs to the public and pension members, but they can direct it into the sustainable development goals, and obviously more complicated than that because they have to invest in companies and projects, and they have to think about return and risk and all those other things. But it seems to me that it was a no-brainer that if you wanted to create change fast enough, then it was going to have to come from finance first and foremost. And so that's really why I got involved in this world, and also what I believe we can do by sharing that with pension members, just to kind of show them, what could your pension be doing? What is it doing at the moment? Knowing that your pension can contribute to Procter & Gamble's deforestation policy. In October, P&G had a big vote at their AGM on what they should do on a deforestation issue, which is obviously very related to biodiversity loss. And shareholders, so those that are invested in Procter & Gamble, are forcing them to be more transparent about deforestation and basically do more. And that is pension member money, making real change in the real economy towards the sustainable development goals. And if we weren't hot on that, and if pension members didn't care about biodiversity, then they might not do that otherwise. So it's kind of really clear direct links when you have the transparency. The problem is that those direct links can't be drawn because most people don't know that they're invested in P&G, and they don't know that there's a deforestation vote. And that's what Tumelo tries to fix.
I think that's fantastic. And I think it gets really exciting the more you dig into the detail around it. And I can only imagine that as you are connecting investment vehicles to the end consumer, and whether that's through technology or not, and they have that voice, then actually what happens the other side of it? So if, for instance, if someone was able to give some opinion on a fund or as you said, an annual general meeting or something that they had a particular individual interest in, is there a gap? Is there something the other side of it? What happened at the annual general meeting? How forceful was their opinion? And is there anything technology-wise that comes out of the back of having answered some questions on whatever you're interested in that particular fund?
Yeah, so we have a complete feedback loop. So someone is alerted of a new vote they can participate in because the company's in their pension, for example. They come onto the system, they read about both sides of the vote, for and against. They can then place their vote preference, which gets sent to their fund manager. So the fund manager at the other end of that is probably seeing vote preferences from thousands of members across lots of different platforms, anyone who's invested in their fund who has access to Tumelo, basically. The fund manager then decides how to vote at the annual general meeting for that company because they have the voting rights and the technology to do that. And they then tell us what happened, which we feed back into the platform. So as a member, if you voted on an issue in maybe 2 weeks' time, you would be able to see, okay, what did others on my platform say about this vote, as well as what I said? What did my fund manager vote on my behalf? And also why? So what was their rationale for voting with me or not with me, with the majority or not? And then what was the final outcome? Because it could, of course, mean, it could be that your fund manager voted to stop deforestation at Procter & Gamble, but the rest of the shareholders actually didn't. And then you can see like, okay, your fund manager's forging a new path. They are being more progressive than the average, or you might see the opposite. And that then allows you to make clearer decisions about how to vote next time, who to manage, who to give your money to, if you're thinking about making your next investment or changing where your money currently is. And then there's a big part, we come back to education, about nuance. The fact that it's not that straightforward. Like, obviously, I would love the world to transition to net zero tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. And there's a just way to do that transition. And also pension members need money at the end of the day. So you also need to be a little bit careful about degrading someone's return, all in the interest of sustainability. Now, I don't believe that it's mutually exclusive, but that requires you to apply some intelligence to do that, to kind of tread that line carefully. And so for members to know, okay, my fund manager didn't vote for this climate vote, why not? Okay, do they already have a 2-year plan with the company and this 1-year plan was too aggressive? Or are they just not thinking about this? Or does that answer not stack up because my other fund managers seem to think that a 2-year plan was fine? Or whatever it might be, it allows you to have more information and make a decision as a kind of educated member of the public.
The education is crucial, isn't it? Because the education will build over time. And one of the things that we see on a regular basis, not in respect of what you're doing with Tumelo, but in other areas such as, kind of ESG and all sorts of those sorts of general areas that are talked about in financial services all the time, but just that whole from an end client point of view, how they're feeling at the time they receive some information, and whether that is then offset against the traditional thoughts and opinions on things like performance. So if you're talking about a fund and how that's progressing in a portfolio, and then you think about the sustainability of that fund or something they're voting on, at what point does the end client favour one over the other? So actually more important to me is the voting and the influence that I've got over that fund and how that's tracking to my views and opinions, versus the fund is just really, really growing fast and that's more important to me than anything else. So I think all of that sort of stuff is really crucial. And that's where I think it gets quite exciting with things like artificial intelligence and sentiment and how somebody is feeling at the particular time they log on to their platform and receive that information or have that vote. Have you had any feedback or experience of anything like that? Because I think it's a growing trend.
So I guess a couple of things. When people vote, they can tell us why they voted in a specific way. So there's a kind of multi-choice option where they can say, they pick different options, like it's the morally right thing to do, or because I think it's best for my financial outcome in the short term versus financial outcome in the long term. We've got different options. And then there's also free form text that people can just write what they like. So sometimes we get the most ridiculous responses, but often you have pension members voting because they think it's best for their financial outcome in the short term or the long term for something to happen. So just because they're voting and having a voice doesn't mean that they're not taking their finances into account, or the return of that fund. So, if they believe that actually Tesla should, do more on human rights in their Congolese minds, they might not be doing that for the moral purpose of it. It might be because they think over the long term, that's the best thing for Tesla to do. And so that allows us to work out who sits in what camp, like how many different people are voting from a moral versus a financial perspective. And I'm sure in lots of cases is both. So I think they're not mutually exclusive. We also have people engaged in different topics. So that when it comes to kind of artificial intelligence and sentiment analysis, and certainly something simpler like audience segmentation, we can see that people, women over, this is huge generalizations of the data on our platform, but like women over the kind of the middle half of their career are more interested in gender equality votes than the average person on the platform. You've got some demographics that are more interested in CEO pay votes than others on the platform, some demographics that are more interested in environmental issues than others on the platform. And so we know that not everyone is ever going to get involved in every vote because they just don't care about it, or because they don't think it's financially material because of the experiences that they've had in their own life. And I think for us, building a kind of Netflix-like platform that allows people to receive personalized content about their pension platform that they're interested in and they're triggered by is the best way for us to build engagement, rather than trying to get everyone to get involved in everything all the time, which is just not going to happen.
That's so funny, because I talked about Netflix, I think just before we came on, Emma, about people like you voted this way, but and that sort of artificial intelligence helping you make decisions, but it needs to be based on you need a decent data set, so it's not leading you down a path that that you don't actually want to be going down. And then I wanted to ask you, so before Tumelo, and I'm going to ask the daft laddie question, but before Tumelo, how was this done? How did people get their voice heard? Did they have to write in? Did they have to email the fund manager? How? And then to even know that opportunity even existed, and the timing of it.
Yeah, I would say, I guess we can split it up into two categories. One is if you're a direct stockholder and you actually own a share through an investment platform, then typically there is some old technology in place for you to be able to vote on that share. You maybe have to do the research yourself, you have to write in to tell them you want to have a vote, but you can actually have a vote. That is for direct stockholders. So for the majority of people in the UK, that's not relevant at all. People in their pensions don't own direct stocks, they own funds. So if you are like most of our users and you are invested in funds as opposed to direct stocks, there really wasn't a way for you to have your voice heard pre-Tumelo. You could write to the fund manager, and when I did a bit of work at some fund managers before starting Tumelo, and we did occasionally have people write to us and say, you know, why are you invested in Whole Foods because they sell meat and that type of thing. And, you know, then it was part of my job was to respond to those inquiries and explain why. But obviously that takes you to know who your fund manager is. And I think actually for lots of pension members, they don't know who their fund managers are. Lots of pension members can't even tell you who their pension provider is. So we're quite a few levels away from someone being able to write an email to their fund manager, and they certainly wouldn't know they were invested in Whole Foods. So yeah, I think there's a lot of limitations before making that type of thing transparent enough that someone could actually engage. Definitely, there has been a rising number of people who would email their pension trustees or their HR department to say, hey, is my pension sustainable? And just generally ask that question, or is there a sustainable option, or could you make it the sustainable option available? Or also like not just sustainability, like Sharia finance as well. Like, you know, if you're Islamic, then you maybe don't want to invest in the default pension fund and you need to have a separate fund available, which sometimes isn't the case, amazingly. So even just from a D&I perspective, people might email their pension manager or their pension provider asking for that type of access. But in short, there isn't a way to do it other than through Tumelo at the moment. And even for us, it's limited. You know, you're emailing to us and we're telling the fund manager, and then at least we're accountable back, but it's not going all the way through. So I think there's some work probably for us to do there as well to, you know, try and increase the influence that someone can have with their vote rather than it stopping at the fund manager necessarily. I think it depends slightly how fund managers respond as well. You know, for the time being, the fund managers we work with are great. They're really progressive and they take the vote into account and they're really interested in what people are saying. So if that continues to be the case, maybe there isn't a need to push it further. I think it depends how that space evolves.
Georgia, I was going to ask you about barriers and where you see them. So you've obviously achieved you've knocked a few barriers out of the way to actually launch Tumelo in the first place, and you're gaining, you know, traction with this, and it's amazing. It's educational and all of the things that you've spoken about. But what's the next stage? What's the next big barrier you need to kind of remove?
Probably our biggest challenge is getting fund manager data in. Not necessarily because fund managers are barriers themselves. I think it's more about the operations of it, just us building out our team, fund managers understanding what we're trying to do and getting set up on their end to do it. It's not arduous, but there's a lot of fund managers in the UK and the US, and we need to cover all of them. And we cover a huge number and many more than we did but this time last year. So I guess just on a kind of day-to-day basis, that's probably the biggest bottleneck in the company at the moment is working with fund managers. And then going forwards for us, I would say moving to the US, I don't think is a barrier. I would say it's an opportunity, but that's something that I need to work out how to do that, how to take the product there. We have got some significant interest from US parties, which is really exciting, from like tiny players all the way through to really massive players. But that was going to involve us being ready for whatever that means. And so for me, you know, focusing on that, finding the time to focus on that whilst also doing all of the work that we're doing here in the UK is challenging.
You're opening up into new markets, but what's your product? I don't know if you're able to share with us, but in terms of your product aspirations and how tech will play perhaps in 5 years' time for the sort of investor? Have you got a vision there that you're able to share with us how it could look?
Yeah, I mean, we are all about connecting individual investors to the companies that they're invested in. So anything that your imagination can cover in that realm is really what we are thinking about. So at the moment we show you what companies you have. So we have transparency. We help you vote on issues you care about, those companies that we have voting. We have looked at other things like getting companies to be more present on the platform, so people might ask questions directly to them or vice versa. There's also a really ancient tradition of shareholder perks, where shareholders in companies have loyalty from, they get rewarded for loyalty at those companies, and so that's doing kind of some kind of sustainable perk initiative we've looked at. So there's lots of ideas bubbling around. I think we still have to focus on voting for the time being. We need to make that a ubiquitous thing. For me, is the most important. But from there, I think building that relationship is really critical. And that all feeds back into the mission that we have, which is about ownership, like helping people to be responsible owners and to know what they own. The capitalist system was all based on the fact that shareholders, like owners, were the ultimate people that were responsible. They were the ones that were meant to lay down the line and kind of create guidelines and be the answerable person. And now we have a system where people just don't even know what they own. So how can they be responsible owners? And so for us, anything we can do to build that connection between you and the stuff that you own through your investments, as opposed to around your house, is what we want to aim for. To think of your investments as things you have, just like you do by your Hoover. And it's a really bad analogy, but that's where we're trying to get to.
No, I completely agree with that. It was quite interesting. We were talking about Steve Bean, who was saying, if you want people to be engaged with your pensions, you've got to make them genuinely useful to people. And I think people just don't find them useful, just kind of tucked away and completely oblivious to what's actually happening with their pension until you get to a certain age and you actually think retirement is actually going to be a reality. And with that, I was going to ask a question, but I've completely lost my train of thought on that. Now I remember. It was pensions dashboard, and I was quite keen to get your thoughts on pensions dashboard in general, because I think that might also help trigger people being more interested in where their money is, because they'll be able to hopefully just open up an application and find all their pensions, that information brought to them, and it's going to get them to start asking more in-depth questions about, so where is that money being invested? And I was just curious if you and the team at Tumelo have had much thoughts around how you could link with the dashboard, or what impact that could have for you.
Yeah, so I think we have got aspirations to link with the dashboard itself when it's ready, because it's kind of always off still, and that linking piece will probably be one of the last things that they end up doing. But I think that I agree with what you said. Like they'll increase how people are thinking about it. Already though, with open banking and I guess open finance will come after that, open wealth, people connecting different accounts, their expectation of a consumer is so much higher around, what they'll be able to do. And so certainly there should be more demand than I think there probably is on pensions, to get people so that they can, pull them into their Monzo app or whatever people want to do with them. And maybe the pension dashboard will force the providers and anyone else involved in that chain to make the data available to make that possible. So even if it's not the dashboard that people end up going to, they will be able to pull their pensions into whatever app it is that they want to sit on. I think it's going to depend on the execution of it. At the end of the day, what people want is that functionality, but they're going to go to the place with the best UX. So whether that's the pension dashboard or not, I obviously don't know. I'm not involved in the project, but I think Money Hub, for example, are doing some really great work in that space as well, allowing people to pull through financial information about their own kind of personal finances, the whole picture. And I know consumers respond really well to it.
I think brilliant. I was going to say the same thing, that in a number of different environments, data is always the big thing, because unless you look at the data and receive the data, you can't really analyze what's going on and how it's tracking. So I think, and certainly with integration and feedback and all that sort of stuff, the data is the big thing. And again, one of the barriers that everyone faces is everyone's doing their own job, and they need to be able to look through the data to be able to innovate as well. And I think that you're bridging that gap. But if we can get better at providing you the data and helping those fund managers consolidate their data that's meaningful and they can play it back, I think is half the way there. I was just going to ask you if you had one wish, and I know I said to you about what the barriers are, but if you had kind of one wish and you could spray some fairy magic into financial services, what would that one wish be? I've really come out of the blue with that, haven't I? You weren't expecting me to say that, but I just think what
Oh, you're on mute, Georgia.
Oh, I'm on mute, sorry. Yes, I did think that when you were saying that, I was like, what one wish I have for Tumelo? And it was like, if I could just fairy dust our recruitment applications and find amazing people, that would be my magic dust for Tumelo. I think for like the biggest barrier we have is just finding amazing people. There's loads of amazing people, but amazing people that are like perfect for the roles at Tumelo. I guess I should probably caveat. We have such a good team. I just want to maintain that caliber, but it's hard when you're desperate to keep moving forward. So that's always a balancing act. But in terms of the financial services industry, maybe it comes back to the people again. Like, I think the people there are certain individuals who have just like grabbed what we do at Tumelo and championed it, and they kind of have made it their own and brought it into their own mission and vision. But it's like champions at Elgin and champions at Aviva and champions at some of the pension schemes that we work with, that have just really made me feel like this idea is validated and that the market really needs it, as well as making us be more successful because they shout about it and they push for it, and really take someone to kind of jump out of the box and do that. So I think more people like that is probably what I would like magic dust. Not necessarily that love Tumelo, but that like want to think outside the box and find solutions to problems that are not right in front of them, or that are maybe require a bit more work. Tumelo requires investment and implementation. You have to really want to do it if you're going to make it work, and that takes people who have got the vision and the energy. And I think there are increasingly more people like that in financial services, but I guess the more that there are, the better, in my opinion.
I think that's really good. And I think we'll just close it there, if that's okay. But I just wanted to say, Georgia, it's so interesting talking to you. And I know, myself and Emma, we've been in this industry for far too long. I won't say the years, but to have some innovative thinking brought in and just fantastic, fresh, new ideas, particularly in this area where it's needed, desperately needed. And so I just want to say that we'll be watching you and encouraging you along your journey and seeing how you're getting on, and just to say what a fantastic job you're doing so far. So thank you so much.
Well, and I guess I mean what I say, like there are certain individuals who will go out of their way to give us a platform so that we can talk about what we're doing, and it's stuff like this that has been the change between this year and last year, and allowed just big organizations to think that this is normalized and to kind of move forward with it. So thank you very much for having me on the show, and I definitely keen to stay in touch. Like we said last time, I think there's probably lots more that we could do together beyond having conversations, although this is very fun.
I think it's great. I think we're definite fans, and I think that, like you say, the interesting from last year to this year, there's some different conversations happening, and whilst we might not be able to recruit the staff that you want to keep the pace, you're doing a fantastic job of running alongside anyway. So yes, just thank you so much for joining us, and we will 100% stay in touch and help you along the way.